Okay, so welcome everyone. Hello. So before we start, I'd like to remind all the attendees to make sure your microphones are muted and let you know that we're going to have a conversation, we're going to talk, and we're going to leave some time at the end to have a Q&A. So you can save your questions for maybe the last 15 minutes, half an hour of this event, and just put it in the chat, and then we will hopefully be able to get to all the questions. So think of your questions throughout the conversation and have those ready for that portion of the event. So welcome to today's Sync Placements and Music Licensing panel, hosted by SaskMusic as a part of Ion Saskatchewan Screen Week and Expo. Thank you to SaskMusic, SMPIA, and Creative Saskatchewan for this event and for having us all. My name is Elsa Gebremichael. I am mainly an artist, musician, singer, songwriter. I have various other artistic practices as well, and I'm moderating this panel today. I'm currently in Toronto, but I was born and raised in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and grew up playing in bands in the music scene over the course of the last 15 years. I played in bands such as Radiation Flowers, Mo Love, We Were Lovers. Those bands have toured nationally and internationally, have had music licensed to television and film, and I was nominated for a Western Canadian Music Award for Pop Recording of the Year. And now I'm currently in my first solo project. I like to call it a solo collaborative project called Wild Black that I've been developing and have released a few singles and videos under. And this year I actually secured my very first sync placements, which is really exciting for me. Thank you. So two of my songs were licensed to a web series called Ghost BFF, and one of my songs was synced to a show called The D Cut, which is on Crave Canada. And so yeah, I'm very happy to be here to moderate this panel and have conversations with these experienced and knowledgeable music supervisors. So yeah, we can all learn more about music sync and talk about music licensing and all of that. So thank you all for being here. We're going to get into introductions. Today we have Amy Eligh from Publishing and Licensing at Arts and Crafts. We have Dondrea Erauw from Instinct Entertainment and Dan Koplowitz from Friendly Fires. So I just wanted to, welcome, thank you for being here. I also just kind of want to, before we get started with the introductions, I just wanted to mention that to me, and probably, I'm sure a lot of other people, being a music supervisor just seems like such a cool, fun job. But once they said that to a music supervisor, and he was just like, it's not as glamorous as you think. And there's actually a lot of admin and paperwork and just tedious tasks. So maybe we'll start with Dondrea, and do you want to just tell us where you work, what exactly you do there, and maybe what a typical day looks like for you, and is it fun and cool to be a music supervisor?
Yeah, sure. So I work at Instinct Entertainment, which is founded by Michael Perlmutter. I've been with Michael for about 9 or so years now, almost. And we do music supervision for television and film mostly. So we work on a handful of different projects. I worked specifically on Degrassi. We work on a Canadian series called Private Eyes. We work on a handful of different projects. And yeah, my day-to-day honestly is working with producers, directors, showrunners, helping them facilitate the creative sound of their project, bringing music to their ears. Sometimes they already have an idea of what they want, and then it's our job to facilitate that via licensing. So we do all of the clearance and paperwork as well. And I get to work with awesome people like Amy and Dan here who send me really cool tracks, and hopefully we get to put them in projects. And yeah, I mean, honestly, a lot of people think music supervisors just listen to music all day and make playlists, and we definitely listen to a lot of music, but there's also a lot of negotiating and paperwork and clearance and really tight deadlines. And yeah, it's more than just definitely listening to music.
Thank you. So maybe Amy, I'll get you to answer those questions next here.
Yeah, I'm Amy Eligh. I'm the Director of Publishing and Licensing at Arts and Crafts. You know, my day-to-day is all over the place because I oversee the entire department. So my main focus, of course, is pitching for film and TV. I also oversee copyright, royalties, licensing, contracts, A&R, and business development. So it's a busy job. I have an amazing coordinator who is my right hand, and I don't know what I'd do without her. So we both kind of know each other's jobs, but it's busy. It's all over the place. It just depends on what time of the year it is, where the quarter is. But I've been working with Dondrea for a really long time. She used to actually work at the company I was at before I was at Arts and Crafts. So yeah, it's been awesome seeing her, you know, kick ass in the music supervision world. So yeah, that's me, I guess.
Great, thank you. Dan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me here. I really appreciate it. My name's Dan Koplowitz. I run a sync agency called Friendly Fire Licensing. Although I am not Canadian, I'm pretty sure I was switched at birth with a Canadian baby, because we do a lot of work with Canadian artists. So it's nice to be here. I'd say the role that I occupy is probably somewhere, it's a link in the chain in between what Dondrea does, which is kind of purely as a music supervisor, and what Amy does working with a label and publisher that owns its own rights. Friendly Fire Licensing is a sync agency, so we act on behalf, we don't own the songs. We act on behalf of a roster of about 50 different record labels and publishers, as well as individual artists, and work to pitch their music to people like Dondrea and to music supervisors. So in that sense, I'm guessing that my day-to-day is probably a little more akin to Amy's than to Dondrea's, in the sense that people are coming to us looking for music, saying we have a search and we're looking for X, Y, and Z. And my job is to do my best and handpick a couple tracks out of our catalog and see if we can find the right thing for them.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you all for being here. I guess since you talked about being a sync agent, can you tell us what the difference between a sync agent and a music publisher is?
Sure. So they're related, but they're not identical. And certainly what we do ties into each other. But a publisher controls or administers the composition, a series of compositions of songs. So publishers, you sign with the publisher, they're responsible not only for sync, helping to get your song into TV shows, movies, and commercials and video games, but also collecting royalties for you. So every time you have a song on the radio or airing or being played in a sports stadium, they're making sure that all those pennies and dollars are going to the artist. Publishers will often set up co-writes. You know, in some ways, they get more involved with the overall career of an artist. What I do as a sync agent is arguably more narrow. I'm not collecting the royalties. In practice, of course, in real life, I find myself setting up collaborations and giving advice and, you know, talking artists through sad breakups and things like that, because when you build a relationship with the artists you work with, it's just par for the course. But my job really is very specifically focused on sync, on getting music into TV shows, commercials, and the like. When I do that, if someone's interested in something, I go back to the rights holders, which in many cases is the artist themselves. In other cases, it is a third-party publisher, and we work with them to make sure that they're okay with the terms and so on. So in that sense, we're a little more of a, you could call it, it's an agent, where I'm a middleman, so to speak, because I'm not actually an owner of the rights, whereas publishers own or in some way control the publishing rights.
Amazing. So we have like kind of a plethora of different practitioners and artists and people in attendance today. And so, you know, some might be familiar with music synchronization and some might not. So could one of you kind of just explain what exactly music licensing, music sync, music synchronization is? Amy, sure.
Sure, I'll take it. So a synchronization license is when you take, when you take music and visual media and you put them together. Now, when we say sync license, we're typically talking about the composition, and then there's another side to it, which is the master, which is the sound recording, and that's called a master license. But everyone says sync just to keep it nice and short. You know, like, what else do you want to know here? I'm not sure.
And can you explain the difference between that, the sync and then the master, like the two sides?
Yeah. So as I said, the sync is the composition. So that's the written work, and then the master side is the recorded work. So you know, the label would clear the master side, and because they paid for it, they recorded it, and then the publisher would clear the written side. And it can get, you know, sometimes it can get confusing. Like, we have some artists on our roster that don't understand publishing. Well, a lot of people don't, and that's totally fine. Because I had to learn a lot when I moved from Red Brick to Arts and Crafts, because before I was doing sync and creative services only, and then now I had to do all the licensing and all those other stuff. So, so it was a lot of learning for me too. So, you know, where was I going with this? Sorry, my kids have been screaming in the background this entire freaking time, so I'm like a little distracted.
No worries.
My husband has rallied them now, so I think we're okay. I don't think we'll have any explosions, but so where it gets confusing is, just say there's what recently happened, there was a live performance for, like, an online performance for a yoga class, and our artist said, well, I'm playing it live, so I don't need to license it. But you actually do. You have to license the written work of the composition. You don't license the master, because it's not our master. It's whoever's recording that live performance owns the master. So we had to go after them after the fact and be like, okay, so he was supposed to clear. I know he gave it to you gratis, but that's not how it works. So that's a constant thing that we deal with sync licensing. Just, it's a lot of education, you know, and like Dondrea has to deal with it all the time too. Letting producers and directors like understand, no, you can't have that, you know, actor singing the lines on this song, this very popular song, because I have to go to Warner Chapel and get it cleared, and it's going to cost like $50,000 for an on-camera visual vocal. So, you know, there's a lot of things that we both have to, well, all three of us have to think about whenever we're pitching or clearing, and a lot of it is just because artists can't know everything, and managers can't know everything. So it's always good to have someone who's knowledgeable in licensing being part of your team.
Yeah, so what you're expressing is that it's not just video games, commercials, television, films. There's other aspects of clearance and licensing that happens.
Yeah, like even at the start of COVID, where everyone was doing those live performances, right? They were all like, a lot of our artists were doing that. Like Dan Mangan did a bunch, and there was this conversation. It's like, really, they should be getting a sync license from us or from whoever the composition owner is, but none of us pushed it because it's COVID and everybody lost their income. So, but I mean, legally we could, but we didn't. So that was a tricky thing at the beginning of those conversations.
Cool. So maybe Dondrea, I'll ask you this next question. Can you just kind of walk us through the process, like through the steps of what a typical deal, how that works from just receiving the show or working on the show, seeing the scenes, or the commercials or the film, to pitching the music, to securing a placement, just what the whole process looks like?
Sure, yeah. I'll say the process will look different every time, depending on, if the song is written in the script, or if it's a song I pitched, or if it's a song that, my producer really wants. Because sometimes it will be, an independent artist, and I'll go to them directly, and that's when I'll have them sign one license or deal memo for the master and the sync, because they own both sides. And then other times I'll have to go to different parties depending on who obviously owns the master and who owns the publishing. But ideally, when we find a song that we do want to use, we just draft up what's called like a standard deal memo that basically outlines the song title, the project that it's going to be in, how long it's going to be used for, and the rights in terms of the, all media world perpetuity, meaning we can, it can be streamed 1 million times on any platform, and it's just this flat fee. The fee itself will be in there. Usually if it's a master and publishing, we obviously have both sides, both fees included in that deal memo, and then have them sign it saying we're allowed to move forward with using that song in the project. And then, we'll spot an episode or a film just to make sure our client's happy with the track that's in there. If they are, then we go to like a full mix playback, where that's where we kind of basically comb through all of the music, including the score and all the dialogue and the sound effects, and make sure everything sounds and, perfect and ready to go for air. That's when, that's the final say. At some point in there's been times where we've had to replace tracks last minute in a mixed playback session. So we have to have really quick turnover time from either independent artists or people like Dan and Amy when we rely on them to clear things quickly. And then, if after that mixed playback, the song is for sure going to stick and it's not going anywhere, then that's when we personally handle the long form agreements, which is the longer license for the master and sync. So that includes like all of the very detailed clauses from, our networks, and music supervisors are not lawyers. So, we tend to have to work with drafted agreements that our production or networks approve. So those are the agreements that we tend to use. And yeah, from there, we have to also deal with the cue sheet. We have to submit all of the publishing information for the cue sheet for the network so that the PROs like SOCAN, ASCAP, BMI can collect the back end royalties for the songwriters.
That's a lot of work.
Yes, it can be.
So when you're like looking for music and you're looking at the scene that or the film that you're trying to choose music for, do you ever get criteria, like they're looking for a specific song lyric or mood or instrumentation? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the fun part of the job. That's the creative part. So sometimes, as I said, sometimes it'll be written in the script that they want a certain song. A lot of Canadian television, unfortunately, does not have the budgets that some of the projects do in the States. So if I have a client that, for example, really wants a Taylor Swift song, we're not going to get that for a Canadian budget by any means. So it's my job to then find something that maybe sounds similar if that's the tone they're going for. Other times, if it's not in the script, we kind of have a little bit more room to be creative and playful with it. So we get the scripts in advance. So before they shoot anything, it's our responsibility to comb through and make sure there are no on-camera moments where maybe someone is singing at a karaoke bar or they're humming a melody in the car. Because those are all things we have to pre-clear in advance before they shoot. If the episode does not have any of those, it's our duty to kind of go through and feel out, oh, this could be a really interesting music moment, or, they're in a coffee shop. We have to have some background source music for those moments. So we're making detailed script notes based off of what we're reading. And then, at least for us at Instinct, we like to be really hands-on with work closely with our picture editors, because they're the ones assembling the dailies from when they're shooting everything. And we like to send them our music notes. And from there, that's kind of where we get creative with it and send ideas based off of what we're reading, based off the characters, based off the emotion of the scene. We have control in that sense of what we're pitching. And then it's kind of up to the music editor and the director that they're sitting with and the producer they're sitting with to kind of sift through the options we're sending and feel out if they're enjoying what we're sending or if they want something, you know, a little bit more in this genre or a little bit more up tempo or a little bit something that has more lyric focus. So that's kind of, you know, how we're sending options. And then sometimes the editors will pop in something we've sent. And then other times we'll spend, you know, a week or more trying to find the right song. So sometimes it happens really quickly. And then other times we're, you know, going back and forth trying to find something that they're happy with.
So thank you. And to touch on the agreement aspect, the contract aspect that you had mentioned earlier. So when you do kind of the short form version of the agreement, the artist signs that and then you put the music to, and then there's still a chance that that song won't be used. And then once it's in that final stage, then there's the long form contract. So then does the artist, say if you're an independent artist, do they also need to sign that contract? Do they have the opportunity to back out if they don't feel comfortable with the scene or maybe had a change of heart? Like, have you ever been in a situation where that has happened, where maybe the artist has pulled out? And my third question, I think, to that is, should an artist always have a lawyer look at the contracts?
Yeah, great questions. I don't think I've come across a situation where an artist has signed a deal memo and then has backed out. If they did, I'd be really pissed. Because if you're giving me approval and I've already given you the scene and everything that's, you know, up front, and then they change their mind, it kind of screws me and then makes me look bad. So I would probably not work with that artist again if that ever happened.
Yeah.
It hasn't happened to me, thankfully. But I will say I have had artists who have denied a deal memo use because a character popped a pill in a scene or something, and, you know, they're not comfortable with something like that, with drug use or, you know, any kind of paraphernalia, which is totally acceptable and fine. I'm not going to blacklist somebody for that. So that has happened before, but
and
yeah.
will they get all the information of the scene that their song is in when, like, at the stage of the demo deal or the memo deal?
The deal memo part, yeah. That's usually if I'm pretty certain it's going to get used. Again, like you said, it's not it's not confirmation that it will get used. It's just one of the options that can potentially be licensed. So it happens all the time where we sign deal memos and then you know, our producer changes their mind and we go with something else. So that does happen. But yeah, I mean, it's great for artists because, you know, independent artists specifically, I feel like any opportunity in that scenario is great. And then from there, you know, we hopefully get to use it and then we'll deal with the long form agreement. But I think that was the second part of your question.
Yeah. And then so I guess, like, with the deal memo and then the long form agreement, you said that the long form has, like, a lot more clauses and is a lot more detailed. So
right,
should an artist have a lawyer look at that, or the deal memo? Like, how, you know, is there going to be something in the deal memo that, or something in the long form that wasn't in the deal memo that, you know, needs to be negotiated, or is negotiations even an option?
Yeah.
And then should they get a lawyer to look at it? Like,
yeah, I mean, I would say if you're going to sign anything, it's always good to have somebody look it over. That's just, you know, a smart thing to do. For us at Instinct, we're not trying to, like, hide anything or throw anything in our agreements to try to scam anybody. So our agreements are very straightforward in terms of, like, what our network needs in order to, like, you know, go to air. There are obviously additional clauses, so it's very important, I would say, to always have somebody look over paperwork before you sign anything. you definitely don't want to be in a scenario where someone is potentially going to help you and then take away rights from you. So that's not what happens in our world, but I will say before you sign anything, it's always good to have somebody triple check it.
Yeah, I mean, a general rule of thumb in life in general is don't sign a legal document unless you understand and agree with what it says. That being said, like Dondrea says, a lot of the paperwork, certainly most of the things from major networks and from people who are licensing a lot of music on a regular basis, there is a certain degree of boilerplate that comes with it. So it's not, I try, before we sign anything, we try and go through it with a fine-toothed comb. But it's very rare, not unheard of, but it's rare that there's some weird, some poison pill hidden in there. Honestly, if anything, what I find more often is that sometimes when we're doing something with a big network, they're cranking out so many licenses that they've misspelled the name of the artist, or they have the track title wrong or something like that. Not because they're being devious, but just because some poor overworked person on their 5th cup of coffee made a typo. So we want to go through it and check that. But I think the big things that you're looking at, generally speaking, which Dondrea touched upon earlier, are term. How long is it going to be? Is it forever, or is it for a finite amount of time? Because for movies and TV shows, it's almost always going to be perpetuity, because they don't want to have to renegotiate the rights 10 years down the line if it's streaming on Netflix. But if it's an ad, for example, you probably don't want to let them have it on an ad on television for perpetuity. The term is one. Territory, is it Canada only? Is it worldwide? If it's an online ad, is it geo-locked to territories, or can you watch it from anywhere? Fee, what's the fee? Exclusivity, are they, then you see this sometimes, especially for ads, if your song's going to be in a car ad, are they asking for exclusivity so that you can't license another car ad? Those are kind of the main things that we look at. And then, of course, every once in a while, there is something dodgy or dubious. And I think, like Dondrea says, I mean, we're not lawyers. I think, on my end, I think I'm good enough that a lot of the boilerplate contracts I can look at and sort of recognize if something's a little above my pay grade. And if we actually do need to get someone involved because it's a more complicated ask, or it's a more just Byzantine agreement. But a lot of it, once you've agreed on the basics, once you've done this deal memo, we're going to use your song, it's going to be in the background of a scene in a bar, it's going to be approximately 1:30, and here's what we're going to pay. Then the long form contract is just that plus some kind of standard legal language.
I wanted to jump in here, and Dondrea was laughing at me because we've been on a few panels together, and she knows that this is something that bothers the crap out of me about some of the contracts that have come through the past few years. When I started, the media buy would be all media, excluding theatrical and trailers, promos, and advertising. And that was like 15 years ago. In the last 3 to 5 years, I've noticed a switch. Where now when they say all media, they go all media, including in context, sorry, I forgot to add out of context. So including in context, trailers, advertising, and promos. I know it's not an intention, it's a really weird way to wrap your head around it. But what it's saying is that, that includes out of context as well. It doesn't say it, but I have a lawyer brother, and he also looked at it too, and he said, no, that's a loophole. So they could actually use your song as a trailer, which is normally a separate license, which can be like $300,000 or, from 50 to 300,000 or whatever. And they could pay their $5,000 all in for it. Do you know what I mean? So yeah. Now I always scratch that out, and I always put I either put excluding, I like that language better. It's very clear. I always say excluding trailers, promos, and advertising. If they really push me back, sometimes the big networks will push back because they're like, we have that language and now I have to go back to legal and get it changed. And every year I go back to them, my guys there, and I go, have you changed that language yet? Because every time you come and bug me, I'm going to scratch it out. So, I'm a thorn in some people's sides, but that's okay. They still come to us to license shit. But yeah, it's very important that you're very clear about that, because you could lose a lot of money by just overlooking it. And again, that's new. That's like the last 3 to 5 years. Before that, it was much more explicit.
It's also additional use. Like, it's not just the use in the scene that it's in. It's like they could potentially be using it in a promotional trailer, which is an additional use for the product, right? So
Sneaky.
I don't know if it's, well, I think it's lawyers trying it on, right? I think they're just like, well, if we can get it. I don't know. Like, I don't think it's intentional. And I never look to a supervisor to say, well, why did you put this in this? Because they always say to me, we just got it from the network or the lawyers or whatever, right? So, and I had a couple friends of mine that were like, oh, I didn't even think about that. And then they started striking it out. Like, they wouldn't send us contracts with that in it.
Well, that's really important. So thank you so much for shedding light on that. So yeah, we talked about sync agents, and we talked about artists, independent artists doing sync placements. So how would an independent artist pitch their music to be in film or television commercial? How do they reach out to a music supervisor? Do they find a sync agent? Like, what is the process? Do they need to have representation? How does that work? Or is it don't call us, we'll call you type of thing? Dan, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I mean, I think I certainly, if you're an artist and you're willing to work hard and build those relationships, then by all means, feel free to reach out to music supervisors. I mean, there's certain obvious things, maybe not so obvious, that I tell to artists if you're going to try and reach out directly to a supervisor. Be respectful. It sounds so obvious, but do your research. If you're going to reach out to a music supervisor, learn what projects they've done. I think most human beings are creatures of ego, and we like to know that people actually know what we're doing and aren't just sending us a form letter. So if I were cold calling Dondrea, I'd maybe go on IMDb and look at the projects that she's worked on and see, oh, she worked on the show Spinning Out, and I really like Spinning Out, and I'm going to mention that. Put your best foot forward, tag your music with metadata so that, from the get-go, explain, do you own this track entirely? Is it sample free? Who should people contact if they want to work with it? All that being said, and I mean, Dondrea can correct me if she disagrees, but I think generally speaking, if you're an artist and you're able to, it's probably advantageous to go through someone who kind of does this for a living, whether that be a sync agent like me, whether that be a record label or a publisher that's working on your behalf. Part of it is just, it's really time intensive. Pitching and sending music out, it's a lot of work. It's a full-time job. But beyond that, I think, Amy's job, my job, and the job of publishers and sync agents is to be reliable, have good ears, and kind of not be gatekeepers, not send a bunch of bullshit to music supervisors. Now, you may be an artist and you may be hearing this and saying, well, my music's not bullshit, so what's the problem? That's not the issue. The issue is that if you're reaching out to a supervisor for the first time and they don't know you and they haven't heard the music, they don't necessarily know. Whereas if it's someone that the supervisor has worked with regularly, if Dondrea knows that if she asks for a fast, upbeat song, I'm not going to send her a sad, slow song, even if it's a good one. Or if the budget is $2,000, I'm not going to send a song that's going to cost 10 times that much, that'll never clear, that'll end up being a nightmare for everybody involved. So I think that if you're an artist and you're looking to get your music in the hands of music supervisors, the best way is to sort of work through an intermediary. But if you are going to do it yourself, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, like I say, do your research, put your best foot forward, reach out to people who are actually working on the type of projects that you can see your music working in. I have Shazam on my phone. I check music all the time when I watch a TV show. If I see something new and I think the music's cool, I look up who the music supervisor is. And if it's someone I know, I drop them a line and mention that I saw it and say, oh, you want, old school hip hop, here's a couple tracks that you might like. So I think putting that extra effort and personal attention in is pretty critical, because you have to understand music supervisors are just, it's like drinking from a fire hose. They're being inundated with I mean, so much, so much music. So make yourself stand out.
Yeah, I can't imagine what your email inboxes look like on the daily.
Yeah,
You must receive
a lot. I mean, Dan really nailed the answer. That's super accurate. It's, for music supervisors, like you said, we have so many emails of people sending music that like that could just be a full-time job in itself, is like listening to it, filing it, getting back to people. But like my daily thing is dealing with my clients and making sure that they have what they need, and I'm working with reliable people like Dan and Amy who are going to have fast turnover time, understand my budgets, I understand their catalogs, I trust them. I don't have to deal with, oh, there's metadata missing. Oh, don't attach MP3s in an email. I don't have to educate on top of doing my job, and that's like the hardest part. A lot of people will send a generic email that's copy and pasted to multiple supervisors that have attachments, MP3 attachments, no indication of if they own everything, no indication of, contact information in the metadata. I have to delete anything with attachments because my email is overflowing with the amount of space that is taken up via MP3. It is a lot of work. And I have to tell you, a lot of the stuff that we get cold submissions from is like not good. So that's the other additional part, is that like you're in a pool of many artists. You could be so awesome, but how are you going to stick out among the pool of a lot of other stuff that's not great when a music supervisor is super busy working on other stuff, right? So having people like Dan and Amy facilitate that, and that's the best way for it to get to our ears. But I will say, we license a lot of independent artists on our shows. I'm listening to like Spotify constantly. I'm looking at blogs. I'm finding up and coming independent artists and licensing things directly from them. So I will say that like I do reach out to people, and if the music's really good, I'm going to hear about it. Our community talks about artists all the time. We talk about who's up and coming, what's exciting. Have you heard this track? Have you heard this artist? We're sharing music with each other. But yeah, I mean, other than that, cold emailing you can do. If you're doing the research, there's websites for supervisors. Sometimes there's emails for you to submit music to. Just write a really nice, personalized, short and quick email. Other than that, maybe find someone who could represent your music.
And if someone's sending you a cold email, when should the artist follow up? Should the artist follow up? When should they follow up? Amy, do you want to speak to that, or Dan?
So for me, it's different, and for Dan, it'd be different than for a music supervisor. Music supervisors tend to not give feedback, and you shouldn't expect them to ever. We just got a brief in, and she actually had outlined what not to do, and then one of them is, don't reach out and ask before using the song. Don't say, did you listen to it and what did you think? Like, she actually has to write that down because she's getting those fucking emails and phone calls. Sorry for the swearing. Oh, I try not to swear, but it doesn't work. And so it's like what I said when I train someone else to pitch, just say when I'm training Chloe to pitch, my assistant, my coordinator, I said to her, you know what, the hardest thing about pitching to music supervisors is you never know if you're doing a good job until you really get to know people, and then they start telling you, oh my God, that pitch that you sent me was awesome, or you're having coffee with them and they're like, no, everything you're doing is great. But you just have to let it go. You have to, as soon as the pitch is out, you got to forget about it. And like, I've pitched things like for a film, and a year later, the license request came in. And it was like, you just let it go. And I've pitched to this one music supervisor for like 10 years. And like 4 years ago, she just popped up out of the blue and said, hey, I want to license this song for this film for X amount of dollars. She's never said boo to me for a decade, but she still was listening, and she used the song. So it's like, you can't be annoying. You just have to let it go. Now for us, I have a rule. So if you send me a music and you send it in a SoundCloud link, which is fine, and it's one link, not a link to each freaking song and not a novel. I probably won't give you feedback the first time you send me an email, and I probably won't listen the first time. If you send me another email a month later, then I'll be like, oh, right, I need to. But it also shows that you're keeping tabs on me, and it's for me. I don't know how many emails I've gotten where like, hi, Jennifer, or hi, Alex, how are you doing? And it's like, what? Do you even know who you're sending this to? Who's Alex? We don't even have an Alex. Do you know what I mean? So like, you do your research. No, like we're a 2-person team. It's not hard to figure out who we are. And you know, I'm fine with asking for feedback. It depends on how softly you do it. I once had a woman when I was on vacation ream me out because I didn't send her feedback within 48 hours of her sending me an email. It was crazy pants. I was like, do you not see the bounce back that says I'm on vacation? Anyways, so it's like that kind of stuff. Like, use common sense. Be like a sensible human. You know, how would you like to be treated? Don't send novels. Don't send attachments. Be kind. Know who you're talking to. Don't expect feedback. If we give you feedback, that's awesome. When I get feedback from a music supervisor, it's like, whoa, amazing. Even when I get a thanks, it's like, woohoo, you know?
Even that's not a given.
Yeah, it's like you don't get that a lot. So you just don't take it for granted ever, and you just don't expect it. So.
Yeah, and I'll say on my end too, it's like I have a lot of people following up, to be like, did you get this? And I'm like, I got this. I can't get back to every single person who sends me music. Like, I wish that I could, and I just can't. And when people say, did you listen? I'm like, I don't have time to even get back to you, so I'm going to ignore this email. So there are many ignored emails in my inbox because I could spend an entire full-time gig just doing that. But I will say the appropriate way to follow up with the supervisor, I always say, is with new material. If you send it to me, I don't give you feedback, whatever, move on like we've discussed. But if you have a new album coming out or a new EP, don't send singles and follow up that way, because it could be like once a week or once every, you know, when you have new material, to me, follow up with that email. I'm like, oh, cool. This is, you know, a new track. I always say too, it's really helpful to be descriptive in your email in terms of like maybe artists that you're influenced by. Because for me, if I'm like last minute needing to find something that sounds like Bon Iver or something, and I'm typing that in my inbox, then any email with that coming up is going to be there. And if it's an independent artist, I'm like, oh, I clicked this email and I think I listened to this, but it's not in my library. I'm going to download it because this is what I'm looking for. And that's kind of what Amy was touching on. Like a year later, someone comes back and is like, I want to license this thing. So that's always really helpful as well.
Amy made a really good point there, which is, you know, you might have a great track and you might send it to the music supervisor who really likes the track. But let's say, you know, it's like a really aggressive rock track, and the project that the music supervisor is working on is a period drama that takes place in the 1950s. You know, it all stems from the needs of the show, of the ad, of the project. So, you know, someone can't just throw your song in a thing as a favor. Music, you know, I think there's a misconception that music supervisors just get to pick their favorite song and put it in, and it's that easy. It doesn't work like that. A lot of the stuff is done by committee. There's directors, there's producers, there's scenes that call for certain things. But, you know, the flip side of that is I'll have this happen. I'll send like a really cool, you know, I'll have like a really cool Latin track that I'll send to somebody. And, you know, they don't need a Latin track because they're not working on a project that requires it. And then a year and a half later, they pop their head up out of nowhere. Hey, surprise, remember that track that you sent me? Like, I did listen to it. I did file it away. It didn't work for anything at the time. And now it does work for something. So we want to use it. So I think it requires, I think follow-ups are fine, but have a little bit of faith that if the opportunity comes around, you'll hear from the supervisor.
Perfect. Thank you. You mentioned metadata. Dan, do you want to talk about what metadata is?
Ooh, the sexiest subject in the entire music industry. I should put on some soft music. Metadata is it's so banal, but it's so critically important. And I mean, it's just this is everything. I feel like if there's one takeaway, at least from what I've said, it's having the metadata right. So that is the information that's embedded in a track when you send it to someone. So if you're sending music on iTunes, you can do Command I and open it up. If you're sending through services like Disco, which I use, or Sync Tank, or any of these various music organization platforms, they all have ways that you can enter the metadata in. But the short version is the metadata is, the critical parts are who owns the song, who owns the master. Is it you? Is it a record label? Who owns the publishing? Is it you? Is it a publisher? Is it just one publisher? Are there co-writers? What's the contact information? Who the hell do you talk to if you want to contact the artist? And I think you'd be surprised by how many people just send an MP3. And I get MP3s that don't have the name of the artist and the name of the song. Or, or it's a bunch of gobbledy, a lot of artists will send their music straight, like they get it straight from the mastering house. And it might say, final mix, August 27th, blah, 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 and a whole bunch of alphanumeric characters. Clean that up. I mean, I think of it as like, if you're at a restaurant, you want them to plate your food well. You want them to just dump it in the trough. This is what having music with good metadata is. If you're able, include tags. What are the genres? What does it sound like? What year was it recorded? What are the names of the writers and what PROs are you affiliated with? Are you with SOCAN? Is it a cover? Say who it's a cover of. Does it have a sample? God forbid, mention that it has a sample. And, it's the more information that you can do so that hopefully when you're sending music to a supervisor, you're serving up to them on a silver platter. You're anticipating any of the questions that they might ask you. If there's an instrumental available, let them know there's an instrumental available, all of that. But at the bare minimum, the name of the artist, the name of the track, who owns the master, who owns the publishing, and what's the contact info. I feel like the rest is icing on the cake, but those 5 things can very easily be the difference between getting your song license and just having a music supervisor say, I like it, but I don't like it that much, and I can't be bothered to go on a detective mission to figure out what this track even is.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the more the better to be. Yeah, like the more you can provide. There's even a lyrics tab in the get info section for metadata on iTunes. So like you could put your lyrics in there. That doesn't mean put the lyrics in the email. That means embed it in the MP3, like for each one to do that. So the more information you provide, the more professional you look, because that's literally everything we possibly could need is there. And you're going to save an email or 2 with questions of, okay, well, do you own this, or are there other people who own the publishing or master? It's also helpful for us to know if it's an explicit track, if there's like explicit lyrics in a song. You could add explicit in the title of the song. That's really helpful for Canadian specific networks, because there's a lot of networks in Canada that won't license things with foul language. So if it's a clean version, you could put clean if there is an explicit version. So just any additional information you possibly could provide, just be as pro as possible.
Great, thank you. So along with that, probably another way for an artist to just kind of be on the ball and prepared and organized, would you advise then that an artist has all their music in a folder with the master and the stems and the a cappella and the instrumental and a clean version or radio edit, like all just, that's probably good for every artist to have kind of ready to go? Like when an artist secures a sync placement, like what are some of the things that you might need from them? Are those some of the things that you would ask for?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to use a song, I need a WAV file. Don't pitch WAV files, by the way, because WAV files don't transfer metadata. That's why we always ask for MP3s. Every music supervisor is going to be different. I always suggest including a download link, either WeTransfer, Dropbox, Google Drive, Disco, whatever downloadable zip file program you can use. and a streaming link, because some supervisors just want to listen to it before they download, where people like me prefer to download and listen later. So by providing both options in an email, you're killing two birds with one stone, and you're saving, yet again, another email of someone saying, can you send me a zip link to download instead? Having, you know, you could then do, if you have multiple albums, if it's a Dropbox link, you can have multiple, you know, albums in there. You can include the instrumentals in there if you want, in case, you know, I need an instrumental in the future. Sometimes when I am clearing something, I will need an instrumental to kind of work around dialogue. Usually I'll request an instrumental if I need it. I don't always need them pitched to me up front. I just need the regular tracks. Because like I said, I don't always need the instrumentals. But when it is, I would need an instrumental, and I would need WAV files. So if you're working with a producer, they should be delivering and bouncing instrumental files for you. You should not have to go back and ask them for that and then have them charge you more money to get that. That should be part of your fee with them. So getting, you know, WAV files and instrumentals is going to be super important.
Yeah, because that happened to me with one of my most recent syncs. I've never had to submit stems, but then I had to submit stems this most recent time. So
yeah, that's another
to have it all together so that you can, like you said before, it's a quick turnaround time. It's nice to have it easily accessible so you can submit it as soon as possible.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because not every time will we need stems, but it's very important for you to have them, because there are certain situations where our editors need to work around a specific instrumental piece, and they'll pull it out, or they'll use it to kind of score a moment without vocals, and they can kind of play with the stems a little bit. So having all of that is definitely really, really important.
There's no bigger bummer than losing out on a license because an instrumental is not available or stems aren't readily available. And I have so many artists who say, well, don't worry, you know, if you need instrumentals, I'll talk to, you know, I got a guy and I'll talk to him and I can get him to you within a couple weeks. Well, that, when, you know, when you're in hurry up mode, a couple weeks doesn't cut it. And, you know, so what I tell artists is as Dondrea mentioned, if you're in the studio, just take the extra time and get the instrumentals. You know, they might just sit on your hard drive for a while, but you'll be, you know, when that day comes and someone needs an instrumental, you'll be happy you got it made.
Definitely. Okay, well, we're approaching almost time, so I think maybe I'll ask one more question and then we can go into the chat. That'll just be kind of the chat warning. So for any attendees who have any specific questions that they'd like to ask the panelists, you can type it into the chat and then I will ask on your behalf. I guess the last question that I'll ask is, do you have a piece of advice for people looking to get their music licensed that is like a question that nobody ever asks you, that you feel like artists or people should know?
I honestly, the biggest thing I would say is that if you want to get your music licensed, you should be doing information on like what that means. You should not expect someone like Amy or Dan or me to educate you. I mean, Amy and Dan, understandably so, they probably will educate in some sense, but supervisors especially, you should not expect them to educate you on how to pitch music, asking what metadata means, asking what, how they want to receive files. It's like, you should know this before you reach out to people. It's not hard to Google these kind of questions and find articles that are about this. There's also a ton of educational panels provided for exactly this kind of thing. Guild of Music Supervisors in the States and in Canada are doing panels constantly to kind of educate on how to go about doing that. There's books you can read. Knowing how the business side of that stuff works is going to help you a lot. I know as artists, you are wanting to create art and then have it be heard from other people. So putting in that extra work of understanding how it works it can be daunting and overwhelming. I understand that. But if it's something you're really taking seriously, it's important for you to actually put in the work and do it, or have your manager do that if you have one. That's the biggest takeaway I could possibly say, because you're going to get ignored, or, you know, if you're asking a supervisor like how to do certain things. That's just my tip of the day.
That's very informative. Thank you so much. Do Dan or Amy have anything to add?
No,
Okay.
is what Dondrea was saying.
For sure.
Yeah, like, this is your business. You need to treat it like a business. I know you want it to be, you know, all sunshine and unicorns and playing gigs and doing all that stuff. But if you don't take care of your business, it's going to hurt you tremendously. So educate yourself.
I guess the one other thing I'd say is, you know, like, pick your shots. You know, you can't be everything to everybody. When an artist says, "Oh, I do everything, and my music is pop, folk, ska, rock, metal, this, that," my eyes gloss over. You know, your songs are going to be right for some circumstances, and they're not going to be right for others. So look for projects that are in the vein of the type of music that you make. Find a TV show. You know, if you watch a TV show and you're like, these sound like my songs, this is totally my wheelhouse, maybe that's something you pursue. If it's a TV show and realistically the type of music they're using is not the type of music you make, don't force it, because even if the supervisor likes it, they're not going to be able to get it into the show anyway. I think it shows that you've done your research, and you can reach out to someone and demonstrate some knowledge of the work they've already done on this or that project.
Yeah, I would also add to that too, you know, a lot of people want to write for sync as opposed to just, you know, being their artistic selves, creating albums and releasing it and then hoping for them to get synced. That's like a whole other ball game. That's very, very complicated, because a lot of people are writing to specific briefs for ads and commercials, and the competition is very intense. If you're, you know, a songwriter that's writing tons of different styles of genre of music, like, that's super awesome and exciting. Publisher might be more interested in actually working with you because of that, because you're building a catalog. But for music supervisors, I feel like we tend to license more artists and music that are directly from, how do I word this? We tend to license more artistic pieces, whether it is an independent artist or a band, because it is a natural progression for them to create this music. They're not writing it for me. They're not writing it for a specific show. So I feel like for supervisors, there's this weird sense where we can almost tell a song was kind of written for sync because we've heard it a million times and it sounds like the Black Keys and they wrote it because they just want to get a sync, as opposed to being their artistic selves, creating something that's authentic and them. We tend to license more of the stuff that's authentic and natural and organic, rather than the stuff that's like been formed and molded a million times. I will say advertisements do more of that, so I don't want to discredit that completely. Just in the TV and film world specifically, we tend to license more of the authentic stuff.
Great, thank you. Okay, so hopefully we can get to all of these questions. I kind of scrolled through a few of them, so I'll start from the top. Someone's asking, is there a way or a place we can see a standard deal memo, names changed to protect the innocent, of course. So I'm assuming you could just Google examples of that, or do you have a specific place you can direct people to see what like a standard deal memo looks like?
There might be a way to, I mean, there might be some books or something that kind of have it, but you could try and Google like a standard agreement that will list, you know, the basic terms. You might find more a long form agreement. I've seen long form agreements online for TV and film. You just have to Google it. But yeah, you know, people like Dan and Amy and I don't like share that knowledge with the public. But yeah, it's somewhere out there on the internet if you looked it up.
Okay, and then this one's specifically for you, Dondrea. Do all music supervisors at Instinct share a disco account? For instance, if I was to send my disco playlist link to you, would all Instinct supervisors have access to that based on a metadata search, or is it best to contact supervisors individually? Does it help if you're a Toronto Raptors fan?
Raptors. We do have a disco link, but we use it for our clients. That's how we pitch music to our editors and our producers. We don't actually use it internally as a music player just yet. We're very stuck in our ways, I will say. We're all using independent iTunes playlists. So contacting us individually is best. We're also all working on different projects. So, you know, we don't all work together on everything. So it's best for us to all have it so we can put it in our iTunes individually.
Okay, so is it mandatory to only be pitching new material as an artist, or how old is too old? Does it matter when the song was released?
I'd argue that it doesn't. I mean, it obviously depends on the need and on the situation. And sometimes, you know, we'll get an ad, you know, it's like Mountain Dew's doing a hot new ad and they want a track from an artist that's going to break in, you know, Q2 of 2021. Of course you have stuff like that. They want something that's new. A lot of, you know, Apple and companies like that will often want stuff that's unreleased because they want to really be the ones to break an artist or break a track. They don't want something that's been used before. I would argue that for every project like that, there's 5 projects where it just depends on the music. Whether it's coming out next month or it came out 6 months ago or it came out 12 years ago, it almost doesn't matter. If the song is right, if it can work within the budget. And of course, it's worth mentioning that for a lot of TV and film projects, you have things that are set during different eras. So it's not unheard of to get a search where they say, you know, it's a flashback scene and it takes place in the summer of 2003. So we need only tracks that are from 2003 or earlier. So I'm not horribly concerned with year of release. Of course, it's fun to be able to go to a music supervisor and say, hey, I got a track for you. You're the first person to hear it. I haven't shared this with anyone yet. You know, that everyone feels a little tingly when they think they're the first person getting to hear a track. But I don't think that if a song is X amount of months or years old, that it's suddenly unsyncable. I don't view it in that way.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple of questions kind of similar but different. So there's one that says, how do I go about getting sync licensing for songs that I sing in multiple languages? And someone else asked, does it hurt artists to write in different genres, jazz, blues, country, and pop? So same, a different kind of question. So if anyone wants to touch on that. Languages and genres.
I mean, when I first came to ANC, it was, the publishing side was an arm of the label. It was just there to support the label artists. So it was a lot of indie rock, which I loved, but I found it very difficult to pitch to the multiple music supervisor and networks and stuff that I work with. So I really tried to branch out with as many genres as possible. And now we actually have this, 30s style jazz band from New York, and the recordings even sound like it's from there. So it's a niche little thing that this guy does, and I was like, yeah, we'll pick that up and see what happens. I've been able to pitch it a few times. Hasn't landed anything yet, but it's nice to have. I have I have a jazz artist, I have a hip hop artist, I have a few hip hop artists now. I have country and pop, and well, country's not so much for sync, that's more for the songwriting side of things. But pop, rock, shoegaze, like dream pop, I have all these different genres. But it's all indie music. So people know if they want to come for indie music, they can come to us, and that's what we mostly have. We have a couple catalog, but nothing major. I know on the label side, people are a bit more specific, and some supervisors really like to know what you're good at. So they're like, okay, what are you good at? You're good at indie, dream pop, or whatever. And that's great. So then you get to pitch for all of those. But, you know, as a publisher, I would argue it kind of shrinks your world and shrinks your ability to be able to play in a bunch of different arenas. So, you know, I come from the mindset of having a lot in the same umbrella, so that the music supervisors go any music and they go, Amy has a bunch of different stuff, so I'm going to go there because this is kind of the sound that we're looking for. You know, so that's kind of the world I come from. And probably, Dan, you're the same. Like sync agents, they can't just stick with one genre. It won't work.
No, well, I mean, first of all, it would be boring for me.
Yeah,
I mean, and I mean, look, there are catalogs out there, and like more power to them, where they're like, you know, we do reggae. That's what we do. We have oodles of reggae, and when you need reggae, you come to us. But you know, my approach has always been to use a really like clumsy analogy. Like if you're a painter, you know, like yellow might not be your favorite color, but you want to have some yellow paint because you might have to paint the sun or paint a banana. And I mean, I think this applies to languages as well. And I mean, I think in my catalog, I'm not sure there's a language I don't have in my catalog. I have a song in Esperanto. I've never been able to license it. Obviously, those are harder. You know, the more, you know, let's not be disingenuous. The more esoteric your music is, the more out there, you know, it's going to be harder. An English language pop song is going to be easier to license than a, you know, avant-garde Turkish jazz song. But then maybe there's that one day that someone needs an avant-garde Turkish jazz song. So
Disco.
yeah. I've been sending Dondrea some really, really weird stuff out there.
I love the weird stuff.
All this like crazy old Thai disco and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, the music's great. I am a big believer that like there's a place for it. Every puzzle piece has its match out there somewhere.
Great, thank you. So someone asked, I'm just scrolling here, what's the best tool or app to use to add metadata to an MP3 file?
Don't you just right click on the track?
If you use iTunes, I think you can just do it in iTunes.
Yeah.
I love disco.
Me too. I'm obsessed. Disco's the best.
They're the best. I feel like I talk about them enough that they really should be paying me, and I swear.
Me too. I mean, the thing that I love about disco is that I upload all my WAV files. I just upload them. I instantly turn into MP3. I can add all the metadata, all my tags, all my instrumentals. And then a music supervisor, I send them the playlist, and they can choose what they want. They can say, oh, I'm just going to stream it, or I'm going to actually grab the waves right now, and they can go back anytime. It never expires. So it cuts down on like the 12 o'clock, you know, midnight email where someone's like, oh, I really need this instrumental. And I'm like, it's there. You don't have to. It's like everything's there. The WAV files are there. All the tags are there. Lyrics are there. You know, artwork's there. So it's definitely been a game changer for me.
Disco.ac, I believe, is the name.
Okay, perfect.
They
So
pay me $1 every time I mention it. I lied before.
Yeah. So there's a couple people who are actually wanting to have some information about becoming a music supervisor. So somebody wants to know, can someone who isn't necessarily a musician become a music supervisor? Would you recommend someone to go through a post-secondary program? Is that necessary?
It's not necessary, but it's going to help because you're going to get education on this side of the world. Like I said, it's more than just playlists, right? There's a lot of negotiating and handling expectations for clients, learning the business side, knowing who all of the representatives are at the major labels, the publishing companies, understanding the rights and how the paperwork works. There's a few programs on music supervision. I think there's one at Berkeley and there's one at the Los Angeles College of Music that also does music licensing. I think it's, if you go to the Los Angeles College of Music, I think you have to take other classes in order to take that program, but there are ways you can go about educating yourself. I know Amy and I are both graduates of the Music Industry Arts program at Fanshawe College. That's obviously not so much music supervision oriented, but it definitely is, you know, all parts of the music industry. To become a music supervisor, there's no one way to go about it. I feel like now everyone wants that job, and it's very hard to get involved, even if you're interning at multiple companies and you're music coordinating with, you know, someone for a short while. It can be really hard to get your foot in the door as a music supervisor. I know people who've attempted to do it themselves and start their own freelance company, and in order to do that, you need a lot of connections in the film, TV world, or ad world. You need to have connections to producers, filmmakers. If you have a friend who's making films and you want to help them with music, that's the best way to start getting experience, building some credits that way. Honestly, that's literally what we do. You can do that yourself, or you can hope that a music supervision company is going to have, you know, a very small window of an opportunity to hire somebody, but it's very, very, very unlikely because we're small teams, and it's pretty rare that we build upon them. That's my answer.
That's great advice. And just to kind of maybe, if there's any way to kind of expand on that specifically to this person who does have media production. So this is a media production student looking to become a music supervisor. They interned at Arts and Crafts in January, as well as the Supergroup and Vapor, but wanting to know, how does one go from interning to working in music supervision?
Yeah, I mean, it's having connections with supervisors and hoping an opportunity comes about, and or starts to educate themselves and do it themselves. That's literally the best advice I can give. It's really, I mean, it's hard. A lot of people are after it. And I will say, if you had that experience, you're more likely to get hired than somebody who does not have that experience. Music supervisors are not just going to hire somebody, you know, out of school who doesn't have any experience in licensing or copyright, or, you know, because then there's additional education going on. So the fact that this person obviously has interned at multiple places, they're getting that experience, so they're seeing everything firsthand, which is miles ahead of other people who are applying for these, you know, jobs. But music supervisors don't have, like, you know, ads on Monster Inc. or like LinkedIn saying that there's a position available. It's like a who you know world. Music supervisors, if they're ever going to hire somebody, is going to ask another music supervisor, hey, is there someone you've worked with that you could recommend that maybe, you know, could be really good for a position? It's a who you know kind of world. So I would say networking is definitely very important.
Someone else asked, do multiple supervisors get contacted by a specific show directors, producers for input? Or is it like one show works with one music supervising company?
Yeah, that's usually how it works. Yeah, it can get too messy if they're hiring multiple people. I will say sometimes they'll work with one supervisor on a pilot, and then they'll hire somebody else for the rest of the project, but it's usually one person.
It's also worth mentioning maybe that, well, that's true for shows. Movie theatrical trailers are a whole nother ball of wax. And you often have multiple trailer houses essentially competing with each other to make the, you know, the trailer for a big Hollywood movie. So there are times, and I've seen the same to a lesser degree in ads. It's infrequent, but it's not unheard of, where I'll see multiple supervisors on the same project. It gets messy fast.
Yeah, it's happened to us like once or twice, where a U.S. production is filming in Canada and it's a co-production series. So if they hire a Canadian music supervisor, but they also have a U.S. supervisor, then they'll get like a tax break back because they're hiring more Canadians. So we've been in a situation where we've worked with a U.S. supervisor on a television project before, and we share roles in terms of who's pitching stuff and doing licensing, but it's pretty rare.
Okay, there's a question specifically for Dan or Amy. Advice on getting into sync licensing on the agency side. I currently work in media sales, so pitching, etc. is my day-to-day, but always thought that sync or publishing would be very rewarding work.
Yeah. I mean, I got into it because I interned for like 4 months or something, and then they hired me as a coordinator, and I came up through that. I mean, being a publisher and being a sync agent are pretty different because, you know, as Dan said, sync is like one avenue. So if you only want to do sync, then try to intern with a sync agent. If you can have it tied to your school, because I know in Canada, I think it's Canada-wide, you can't do an internship, an unpaid internship without it being attached to a school program. So, you know, that's the only downside, because a lot of these independent or these smaller sync agencies, they don't have the budget to pay for an intern half the time. So, I mean, a lot of labels and publishers don't either. So it's better that if it's attached to a school program, unless they can get grants for it. But yeah, just like hanging out with as many people as you can that are part of that scene, and getting to know you, because again, it's a relationship game. Like I got into Red Brick, well, it was Casablanca Media at the time, because I knew someone, or I met someone that did a lecture at the school that I was at, and I asked her who should I reach out to, and she gave me the name of Ed and Jen, and helped me connect with them, and the rest was kind of history. And like Dondrea with Michael, our VP at the time, like Michael called her and said, who do you have that's really cool? And she was like, oh, Dondrea. So, you know, it's all about that. It's less about, you know, submitting resumes. But yeah, I think just like being out and talking to people and making yourself known, it's kind of tough right now because of, like, we don't see any of your faces. Like when you do these kind of panels and stuff, we normally like meet people afterwards and you see faces, and then the more you see them, the more you recognize them when you're out. So this is kind of a bummer where we don't get to see any of you, and we're just seeing names like on a message thing here, and it's really tough to put names to faces. So that's a little bit unfortunate. But whatever. I guess you guys just bother us.
I'll add one thing to what Amy said, which is we've spent a lot of time covering, and I think rightfully so, how to act and, you know, how to like be respectful towards music supervisors, how to approach a publisher or a sync agent if you're an artist. It cuts both ways. And if my advice to anyone who wants to be a sync agent is give that same level of respect, openness, transparency, and communication to the artist that you're working with. You know, half the reason that I started my sync agency is I ran a label of my own, and I would work with some outside sync agents, and you know, I wouldn't hear from them. I wouldn't really know what was going on. I wasn't sure if they were pitching my stuff, and that was a bummer. And the vow that I made is that when I do this, I'm going to really be accessible. I'm going to try and answer questions that the artists and labels I represent have for me. So, you know, we're talking about building the relationships with the people you're pitching. But if you're an agent, if you're a sync agent or a publisher, that's only one set of relationships. The other set of relationships you have is with the artists and the musicians themselves. And let's not forget that none of what any of us does would mean anything were it not for the music that they're making. So if you want to be a sync agent, have those long talks with your artists, learn what their goals are, learn what their expectations are, be open and transparent about how you're going to handle business and financial things with them. I think that's how you hopefully develop a reputation for being, you know, pleasant to work with and being a fair dealer. And the music industry is small, and if your shady word gets around real fast.
Yeah, super fast.
Okay, so I think we have time for like maybe 2 more questions. Someone asked, there's actually 3 questions here, but I'm gonna pick one. So how has the demand and pitch to directors and producers changed with the rise of the streaming giants?
Pitching doesn't change for me. I will say a lot of the time, you know, some of our clients are coming to us with songs that they want to use, and they just don't have the money to use them. because they'll think it's an independent artist, but it's actually like not. But I'm still pitching music to everyone directly. It honestly depends on how music savvy they are. I deal with clients that literally know nothing about music and rely on us to provide a sound palette, where I work with other people who are like, this is exactly what I want, go and clear it for me. So I'm in between all avenues of that, but I don't think the streaming, platform world is really changing my job yet.
Okay, I think there's a couple questions in here that were answered like in the general conversation.
I'm gonna put our submission email address here. If people want to send music, you can do so.
Yeah, so that was the last question on the chat here, is how can we get in touch with the panelists? So I think the people want to know. The people would be very happy to get your contact information. So thank you for doing that. And I'm just going to do one last scroll, make sure I didn't miss.
Dondrea and Amy, I think you just sent that to the panelists. I think you need to change it to send to the attendees as well.
Oh, did it just send to the panelists? I thought it went to.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We have to go to all. Okay, we have to switch the thing. I'm sure I'm doing it right here.
And attendees.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here and for taking the time to, educate us and give us more information and insight on the music sync world. Thank you so much to SaskMusic and SMPIA for inviting us to be a part of Eye on Saskatchewan Screen Week. Thank you to Creative Saskatchewan and to all the attendees for being here. I think that's it. So have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
For having us.
All right.